my first question to you is, how are medical device regulations evolving over the years, especially in India?
Uh, Over the last couple of years, there's been an increasing focus in terms of streamlining the regulations, especially with respect to medical devices. This has been a sunrise sector. So over the last 2 decades, we've seen the government still trying to figure out exactly how to regulate it. We've seen, of course, regulations come in one way or the other, either from the manufacturing side or from the pricing side. But there is still lack of clarity in terms of a unified body to take oversee all of it. Since COVID, we're seeing again a renewed focus onto it, but unfortunately, we've yet to see any concrete steps themselves being taken. Just a few weeks ago, again, we've seen the government kind of come out and say that their intention is to really streamline the regulatory body around this. We've yet to see it. What I'm hopeful for is that eventually all the inputs that the industry has given will be recognized by the government and implemented. And as we do that, not only make it more efficient for new manufacturers and new products to come into the Indian market, but what would be ideal is to actually have them also harmonized with some of the international regulatory bodies. Let's say the European CE body or the US FDA or the Japanese PMDA, because right now what happens is for a manufacturer like us, there's a process we have to go through to get our product and facility certified for the Indian market.
Right.
Then we have to go to the European CE body and go through the entire process all over again. Then we have to go to US and do, so there's a lot of duplication of efforts that is happening. There are some global efforts that are happening in order to essentially harmonize these different regulatory bodies. And India has a great opportunity, especially with the G20 presidency, to take up this as a topic of agenda as well, and actually lead the effort, not just participate, but actually lead the effort of solving not just the domestic problem, but also a global problem. And if this happens, it'll be a very, very exciting thing, not just for the manufacturers, but most importantly for the patients who'll see newer treatments come to them cheaper and faster.
So, being a medical device manufacturer in India, what are the challenges that you face?
The biggest one is until now has been that we've had a fairly small domestic market, right? But like many of the other sectors in the economy, it's been just too small for the kind of investments that medical devices requires, and therefore we've been completely dependent on outside and imports. But over the last almost 10 years, what we've seen is finally that turnaround happening, thanks in large part not just to the economy itself improving, but also the kind of state and national level insurance policies that have come out. The hundreds of millions of people that are now getting the access to healthcare, which has led to investments into hospitals. And because of that, finally, there's a domestic demand that's coming in. And what we see is slowly, one sector at a time, finally that import dependency turn. And as those are turning, we'll see the manufacturing and investments into manufacturing also happening and us being able to export. But till now, because you don't have the domestic demand itself, it becomes very difficult for a new manufacturer to come in and do any investments. And then when you go to the export markets, there's a huge requirement, not just on the pricing side, but also in terms of how well have you done your clinical trials. Unlike in pharma, where most of the clinical trials are just to prove bioequivalence, in medical devices, you actually have to do a full-fledged clinical trial set to prove both your safety and efficacy, because there are no exact copies of products. So barrier to entry in medical devices have been larger up until now, and the barriers are still very much there. But the ability to pay for them as the Indian economy and the size of the Indian market has risen is improving significantly. All that being said, for us, coming back to your question, what the challenge is still being able to convince the global market that India is producing medical devices that are either at par or better than anything else that's around the world. We're fighting this perception that if it's made in India, it's cheaper. It's not at all true, and we've proven that multiple times. But this is a fight that will still keep on going for the next 5 to 10 years.
So, what has been your experience of the medical device park that is in Hyderabad for SMT?
It's been a wonderful experience and an initiative that I think the government has taken. The level of infrastructure that we have found has been absolutely phenomenal. And overall, the process from us picking Hyderabad as the site for our next plant, all the way to getting it to the operational level has been one of the kind of the smoothest experience that I can think of. So all in all, I'm very happy with the way we went from the decision to exit to operationalization. And the second part, what I'm also more excited about, and I think there's an opportunity to do more of this around the country, is have more of these parks. Because of these theme-specific parks, you have a lot of different types of vendors that come into a dedicated area, and it creates a very productive ecosystem. Which improves the speed with which we can innovate, and of course share a lot of the cost. So there was a service that we would have had to invest into, which would have costed us something like several crore in terms of capex and many lakhs on operational. But because everyone else in the facility had the exact same requirement, the government came in, put that shared facility, and we were able to bypass that capex. So all in all, very happy with the park.
So lately there has been focus on the training of medical devices. How crucial do you think this is?
Very. So in medical devices, there are two things. One is there's a difference between the user and the patient, right? In pharma, what happens is there's no user. It's a patient that has to just take the medication. But in this, you have the physicians, and in our case, the cardiologists that actually have to use the device itself. And some devices can be very, very complex to use. And because of that, what you see actually happening in the field is specialization and hyper specialization that's happening. So for the longest time, you had this group of cardiologists that are called intervention cardiologists that specialize in doing angiographies, angioplasties, and basically non-invasive procedures. Now there's within intervention cardiology, there's another segment that's coming up called structural heart. And a subset of intervention cardiologists are going to focus on just the structural heart. So this is just to paint a picture for you how important that skill set is. And because of that, not just the initial training while the physicians are in school, but also the ongoing education comes in important, right? Because as new technologies come in, even if a cardiologist has been practicing for 20, 30 years, he may again have to be retrained. And that's where investments by the governments, as well as the participation of industry and manufacturers like us comes in. Because we're the ones who have designed the devices, we have to invest very heavily to train the physicians to be able to use the new devices. So the timely attention to this in the most recent budget, I think, was a brilliant stroke, and I think more needs to be done towards that as well.
Okay, so my last question is, how do you see the Indian medical device industry growing in the next 5 years?
But I believe so. A sector like ours, we're growing at somewhere around 15 to 20% per annum, and this is largely on the back of just more and more hospitals coming in, more and more patients kind of getting access to it. And of course, all of this is very exciting. But I think the bigger opportunity is still being missed out, which is the global market. Even as fast as we're growing at 20%, India still represents about 2% of the global market, right? And we're 16, 17% of the global population. So India by itself still has a very long way to go. But on top of that, I think with China Plus One, I think this is the moment that India and the medical device industry needs to focus on. How can we scale up in terms of multiples and not just percentages, right? We should be looking at 2x, 5x growth, not 20%, 30%. And to do this, I think the three things that I would focus on, one is, of course, investments into the capacities, into manufacturing. Second is the regulations, which we spoke about, streamlining the regulations, not just for the Indian market, but also harmonization with the international standards as well. And third is when we go to the international markets, there's a heavy requirement for clinical data, which are very expensive to produce. So we need to look at two things. One is how can India or the governments incentivize and support the companies that are trying to do them. But then at the same time, what happens is we have to do the clinical trials in those respective global markets, which is also what makes them more expensive. We need to see how the governments can work together so that those studies can be done in India and the data can be used outside. So this will have a double-edged effect, right? One is, again, it'll help support the Indian economy. but then second, it'll make it much cheaper for us to do it and then use the data in the international market. So I think these 2-3 things, if well done, we can be growing at 40-50% and not just 15 to 20.